Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 59. I'm approaching this today with a little more vim and vigor than content prepared or thoughts going in the direction of, making this thing sing today. And I think in a very interesting way, it's a good thing because I've worked back into the gym. I've put the gym back into my life because as I get toward the end of my physical therapy, which was 2 days a week, I would add a third day in the gym just to sort of get back to making these appointments with the gym, with PT, and, my previous sort of incarnations in the gym life that I used to have in New York and out here. I've been intensely doing 3 days on, 1 day off. I did that in New York for a long time. Just 3 days is probably more reasonable and achievable. And I think now it's more like on a 5 days a week, but I include that walking, fitness, some kind of outdoor activity, and the gym, minimum gym body part split, boring stuff, all at least doing 3 days to hit all body parts. But as I wind down, I have to put it back into my life, and I want to also do the things I need to do, and I am sort of making final preparations and thoughts about work. My foot is still a little jacked, but I've sort of been released from the acute injury phase, and I think it's just going to be wear and tear and the pain of a physical job. And as I prepare and as I also try to dust off a resume, and coincidentally I had a visit from a friend from college. He was in Santa Barbara and I shot up there to catch up with him. And inevitably things turn to, I guess nostalgia, but more just sharing reminiscence, which I guess is nostalgic, but in the pathway that I am channeling for the desk session, some of these things then become clues, and a very intellectual, academic kind of text analysis notion that makes a lot of sense but maybe doesn't activate the actor as much as it would is you learn more, or you learn a lot about your character from what the other characters say about you. The only problem with that is if a script is not particularly well written, the intertwinedness or interconnectedness of all the characters isn't really baked in, and so each scene is just sort of not... You wouldn't get that information. So while that's a cool little tip, it's not always the case. The problem with that information is when you're talking about Chekhov or Shakespeare, Ibsen, you will get some information from other characters, and because they're well written or they're about that. And the only interesting shit for those ancient times was talking about the king, the queen, Hamlet. And so you do learn that Hamlet is afflicted with, at very least, some kind of melancholy. His mother enlists Horatio to find out what the fuck's wrong with their dude. And I think Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, what's up with your boy? And so that would be a hint that your character is in some kind of disarray. Now, from a spontaneous, not intellectualizing point of view, that information wouldn't really help you in the moment, as they say. But I think the duality of existence and the duality of even acting and the duality and the big tent of storytelling, and if you take all the preciousness out and take all the technique out, you are a storyteller, and you are literally just a chess piece to the story. In its purest form, an actor is literally just one of the chess pieces. For example, if you ever played in the, it was a little before my time, but there was this electric football, and you would send these little figures, and the field would vibrate, and they would, that's what literally all you're doing is that. And that frees you up from all the intellectual and frees you up from all the ego stuff of like, what am I feeling? That stuff doesn't really help if you're literally just a chess piece to tell the story. Now, where the storytelling becomes riveting and is that the pawn in chess can capture the queen. So then if the story's about the little guy finally toppling a system, that would be like, that would be you are the pawn. And so there are characteristics that are just really window dressings for the story. But if you're able to be both improvisational, emotional, this is what all the training I think is for, then it wouldn't fuck your head up to get into your head if you heard from reading another part of the script that you're not in, that something as ridiculous as something's wrong. I think something's wrong with his foot because of the way he walked in the other day. That would be a hint that you have an injury. That may not be in the script, but somebody said it. Now you can't make it a thing, but you could, have. You could put a tiny little lilt to your walk, and you'd be reacting to what you heard, and you would then put it into play because you did some detective work. But that really wouldn't be in the moment, because now you're really holistically, you're acting as if you're in a play rather than your character believing in the given circumstances. So that's why people don't like that, because they have to teach you something in drama school. So they have to teach you like the idea of script analysis, which is really from the audience view or the academic view. So I do understand that. And I think maybe we misunderstood that, or no one explained it to us, that to get a degree, they have to give you courses that don't always correlate to your exact craft as an actor, but in the holistic theater thing. So, I'm blanking on some really vivid examples of like what other people say about you. But I mean to say this, the long and the short of it is, the only time nostalgia and the remember when stuff ever comes in handy is when you're on a path, which I'm trying to be on, of rerouting some impulses, rerouting some self-defeating notions, rerouting some emotional anchors, rerouting and trying to create a new life, a new pathway. When you hear, because we had my friend and I caught up for a couple hours solo, and then he was crashing with his sister and her husband, so we had time to go out. And then when you're out together, we can't just sit there and do reminiscing with an audience. We have to bring them in. And so my pal is a very open person and a very smart person. And it would start with, Carl used to do this, Carl used to do that. It's funny, Carl was the original that, this or the other. And so it was like catching them up to or bringing them into the nostalgia. But what it is sort of the equivalent of what other people say about you is a clue to you. Now, that can cut many ways, and, it's why a trip down memory lane is appealing to some and not to others. But you could be way off on your estimations of how you came across. And my wish, I suppose, was that I get better, but that I hope the core of me was remembered well for consistencies in the right plane. And then if you would share something that was embarrassing, that some of the consistencies were on dysfunctional planes. Not that he was shitbagging me or anything like that, but it was very helpful and very informative. And I guess when you're also surrounded by people who you have that have affection for you, you can be more of your authentic self. And this was the case. And while I was soft pedaling, and I would just in the course of conversation, I used to do a bit about, my least favorite omelet is the build your own omelet. And they go, why? And I'm like, because I'm going to fuck up. I'm going to put fucking artichokes and black beans in the fucking thing. Just give me 3 good omelet choices because I'm going to screw it up. And that we were joking about like all the customization and having nothing curated anymore. And you get this decision fatigue. And that was going over well. And, I would just insert bits, that are also from the show into the conversation. I always preface it, and it was getting a good reaction. I was in a good mood. I was, glad for the diversion of a change of scenery and a familiar, friendly face and things like that. But I guess if I'm on this sort of giving myself the career counselor kind of inputs or prompts, if you will, what about the things I discussed were, and what about the things I heard were evidenced in being on a new trajectory and trying to figure out some intrinsic values and things that meant something to me, and or where I was hung up, or where I had stumbling blocks, or where my heart was in the right place. And so, reverse engineering how some of the things went right in my life, and some of the things I do right and some of the things I do wrong, And my buddy's a very interesting cat, and his sister is very impressive to me because of her, a story I think I've told before, but this is before Zoom, and this is before, a lot of this sort of, at least my involvement. There were plenty of podcasts at the time and plenty of self-help gurus and stuff, but I was just not really keyed in on it. And I don't know if she got it from that or whatever, but she had a job interview, and it was the first one or the second one, I don't know, but it was over the phone, and it was in the morning, and she woke up, got a shower, put on the exact outfit she would wear were there to be an in-person interview. And this is before the pandemic, so the idea of in-person was that's how you went to work. You know what I mean? And so that's why this seems kind of trite now, but at the time I was just like, that's crazy, because there was no chance anybody would peep into your background, and you'd have to either blur out your background, you'd have to make your bed for this Zoom interview. It was before that, but she was just on the phone. And she got up, took a shower, got dressed in the outfit she would wear if it were an in-person interview, and just sort of like prepared to put that out just through the phone, through the tone of her voice, through the ability to have presence of mind that I got up for this. And I was bowled over by the story, because I was like, where do you get that? Maybe people study in business school, they get tips like that. And I guess we got tips, kind of stupid tips in drama school about auditions. If you get a call back, wear the same thing you wore in the first one. I guess it just depends on your experience. But I think it was sort of an intrinsic thing, or maybe like a Tony Robbins thing or whatever. And I told her I wanted to let her in on the fact that I admired that, and that was a great example of facing the world as if, And she goes, it's actually the job I have today that I got from that, at least that stage of the interview. And I was like, see, that's even better. And I told her that I did a dream board. She goes, I have to get back to that. I said, you do that? And and I didn't know that she did that, because I don't know her obviously as well as I do my buddy. And I said, you do that? And she goes, oh yeah, I got to get back to it, And there was a funny line where, she had a vision of Santa Barbara, and she had a vision of a job, and she had a vision. And then her husband said, she manifested me. And I was like, that's hilarious. And, you hear a lot about manifesting, and, and I think it probably goes all the way back to prayer. It goes all the way back to rain dances. It goes all the way back to Dale Carnegie and Napoleon Hill with the power of positive thinking and all that stuff. And there is something to it. And I had shared with her that I had done my first one, and I went to Kinko's and I printed up images, and she goes, that's awesome. And I said, over the years, I guess if I were, hearing correctly some of the things that my buddy was laughing about, telling them stories about when I used to break people's chops, and just sort of this New Jersey negativity was often a mask of cynicism, a mask of fear, a mask of comedy, but it was also like negative. And that I would mock something like the dream board. And then I told her that, all the people that, and I've said this before very recently, the few times I've seen that one, and I don't want to get too far into it, but I mean, I've seen them around houses when you go to dinner parties and stuff, and a lot of those folks, if not all of them, have much of what they sought. And again, it's different for everybody, and that's the beauty of it, is I can put whatever life ahead of myself, and it reminds you that, I guess, control the controllables, or it reminds you that your version of success is very singular. For her, it was Santa Barbara. For her, it was a house, a husband, that kind of thing. And I don't find any of that trite anymore. Maybe I did at one point. And, when they say, tell you something about yourself, then look at your 5 best friends, or the kind of people you roll with. And, it's as you get older and as people move from coast to coast and stuff, you don't see these people a lot of the time, like my buddy. But those, I got to remember, those are the people that I wish I could spend more time with. But those are the people that I would count on my inner circle, and their good habits and their vision for themselves. While I was entertaining with my shit talk, it was maybe not the best thing for myself. And so now, to be inspired by somebody else's, vision for their lives and their accomplishment, and just having the life, or a life, or a purposeful life, these are the goals now, and these remind you of what's important. So now, as I'm dusting off, I'm trying to do something with the real estate license, so I'm dusting off old resumes on Word documents, and I had a job in New York, and again, changing the narrative. So I got to somehow spin that I've been in the service industry, but at the high end, and that is in and of itself sales, and that during the pandemic, my industry was shut down, and I got a real estate license with all that free time in the shutdown so that I could, quote unquote, make a transition. So I have to sell myself as this. If you're interested in giving me an opportunity, it's because I see myself transferring some of these skills, even though for many years I was in the restaurant business, as a lack of a creative support system for an acting career, and I still intend to do it. But, you have to spin. But I also, when you look at these resumes and some of the places you used to work, some of these gigs were good for the acting career, because if you were doing a reading or a play reading, which was just something they do a lot of those, just do a table read. Sometimes people would, they wouldn't necessarily audition you, but they'd have to come by the bar to talk about it, to drop off a script. And it was, if it was a certain place I worked that was neighborhood bar, mid-market, a solid B+ food, and it was the kind of place that had music, and it was the kind of place with tablecloths. But you could also be wearing you could come in after your softball game, but then I left that job, and I got a job at a place I think is still up and running, and I don't know if it still has the same strictures that it did when I worked there. But I worked at a place called the Campbell Apartment in Grand Central Station, and it's this fancy Florentine palazzo kind of vibe, and it's an actual room that this guy Campbell, who was the financier for the Vanderbilts and helped build the thing, this is where he had his office. And so it's been recreated, and it's this opulent thing, and the uniform, the waitresses wore red cocktail dresses and pearls, and I had to wear a bow tie and a vest and a tuxedo shirt, and as I reverse engineer why I didn't dig that job, and it sort of hastened my exit, the money was great, and I think I only did 3 or 4 nights and maybe a day shift here and there. But you had a dress code, like you couldn't wear jeans, sneakers. You had to have slacks and shoes, and we would turn people away who weren't dressed appropriately. Can you imagine that? I think it was 2001. And so that was not a place where people could visit and just kick it, unless you, buddy, had to fucking put on a jacket and a tie, and we were, still in your 20s. It's like, who the fuck's got that or whatever. And so I realized now that I was looking at the resume, boy, that was a lonely gig, and I did not dig it because it was lonely. And you bonded with your coworkers, and it was busy in short bursts because it was in Grand Central Station, and so it went along commuter lines. But there were slow days, and you were miserable, and nobody could just come and keep you company because they'd have to fucking put on slacks, And so, if you were doing some meditating on a job that was a fit, you would say that wasn't a great fit. And so moving forward, what's going to be a fit for me? And what intrinsic value do I see in things? And life can't be all just hanging out with the people who like you, but it is a reminder, because when I haven't seen people for a while, I have a lot to catch them up on. And while it hasn't been a ton of gigs and stuff, there is some forward motion, and it's very interesting. And you even forget, there was a short film I did that was in a Beverly Hills Film Festival. There's a million festivals. I don't want to shitbag myself. But anyway, like, that's enough information to share to quote unquote a civilian. And then you can send the film to them, and then you forget that, people are just, glad to hear people still taking swings. And I don't know what that really puts in my path for, decision making. But I guess it's a way to do some investigating. And I think confidence becomes the big issue. My buddy told a story about how my reputation was that I was a nice guy, and that when it came to dating, we had a dalliance where the same person was involved, but I did not really continue past the dating stage, and I guess when he was having his tryst, my name came up, and he said, "Well, what was it about Carl that it didn't work out?" And she literally said he was just too nice a guy, and that's a kiss of death at a certain point in your life, because everybody wants to be the bad boy. But it's a clue. It's a clue that I just wasn't a fly-by-night guy. Or I'd made the joke at the table. It's just like, she didn't know I wasn't. I just didn't have the balls, to be what they call today as a fuckboy. I just didn't have the confidence to sort of be after what I was after. And, I didn't know how to be honest and still, fair. And that was a bad habit of mine. And now, ultimately, a good relationship is one of the key parts of my life, and one of the strengths I rely on. So maybe that was always intrinsic, and I just wasn't going to be able to be casual. But that was an interesting insight, that he shared with his sister. But he also shared, just my love of music, that it was all encompassing, that the mixtapes that I made were off the charts, and that they included music that wouldn't necessarily pair together. And he actually became like a wedding DJ for like side money. And he said, well, actually Carl was the original DJ, because he made these tapes that we would play at the party. And so I don't know, it's definitely somehow a creative thing. I spoke about, I sort of brought them into the sorrow and the triumph and the celebration of being asked to speak at my girlfriend's dad's funeral, and how I do not separate being able to speak with feeling and write words of emotion and write words of high thought, and to bring quotes and to be appropriate and to get laughs. All that talent is not separate and shouldn't only be used, quote unquote, for the stage, I think. Or at least that's the way I want to go about it. And so it was a good trip, and I am, trying to move forward, with a lack of woe, I guess. I don't know how anyone does that. And there's a funny notion about sort of the prisons, I guess. It's a little dramatic, but how identity, quote unquote, can be a very minimally a limiting notion of yourself, and at maximum it could be a prison, right? So the story from The Sopranos that has been told oftentimes is that, and it's often what you do to yourself, but the story about The Sopranos that I've heard often told, and I think it's the pilot episode, or at least the first season, before anybody really knew what the hell was coming at them, and then it was universally praised and became what it became. But there's a scene where there's a barbecue, and Tony Soprano, the boss, he's wearing like a silk shirt that everybody like was rocking back in the day, and he was wearing slacks with loafers, if you remember, and Gandolfini's bow legs and all that shit, and he's poking around at the sausage on the grill or whatever, and everybody's burning cigars and shit. But the story that is told as the lore of The Sopranos behind the scenes was that there were the real fellas, the real made guys, the guys in the La Cosa Nostra, were fans because there was a lot they were getting right. But one guy just literally called, like prank called, I think it was Gandolfini or David Chase, I don't know which one, and literally the thing was, hello? Yeah, just one thing. You're doing great, but a Don doesn't wear shorts. And that's funny to me. And I used to joke, and I don't know where, I don't think this is before, but I used to always have a thing about never getting caught out after sunset in shorts. So like in the summers in New York, if you go kick it and you be in the park in shorts, and then like people are like, let's go get a drink. You're like, I gotta go home. I gotta change. I gotta throw some pants on. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because if it's fucking midnight and you're still wearing shorts, like what kind of shit bag thing is that, And I must have got that from somewhere. But the idea that a Don doesn't wear shorts even at a barbecue, and as if like shorts were a vulnerability or showed your chicken leg, it makes sense, and that's good information, dramaturgy for the rest of the show. And it's a great example of hearing something about somebody. Imagine if that were the holistic version of hearing what people say about the character. Is very informative, right? But a Don doesn't wear shorts. But that is ultimately a prison, and that show dealt with, he the things he might have been were he not to have had to take on this mantle and the burden of being the boss, following in his father's footsteps. And I think as I look at, trying to dust off a resume, and the only people who matter are the people that matter. And the outside voices and the outside, and sometimes the burdens you take on are all self-stirred. And, I have a resume, I have an acting resume, and it's got plenty of work on it. And I have a restaurant resume, and it has a lot of years in the business. And the only person who's upset about it is me, and if anybody were to project onto me like, boy, you've been in that fucking gig for so long, I'm like, it's actually worked out, and now I have to change the narrative. And the prison I've given myself of identity is that I can't be happy or proud of myself if I can't be a full-time actor, when no one is, and why not be, Like Gary V says, Gary Vaynerchuk, very interesting cat. You know, it's like everybody's trying to stunt for a bunch of strangers to get an opinion of balling out of control, and these people you don't even know, you know. And he's like, you need to buckle up, drive a fucking Honda, and don't push a BMW, because who are you trying to impress, you know? And I take that to heart, because who was I trying to make sure approved of me but myself and the people who cared about me. And what my buddy does for a living, I could give a shit. He's my buddy, you know what I mean? And as I dust off the resume, it's like, well, what was I supposed to do, you know? And if I can't sell it as a transition, that I was in an industry that afforded me flexibility, great income, and I got to do it on both coasts. Not to mention I did it in Florida, you know, that I was able to pick up and have this skill that kept my bills paid across the nation, you know. And now I have a real estate license, or now I want to move into this space or whatever. Like, these are all fine. And the prison you create for yourself, meaning like, I'll never get out of quote unquote being a bartender because I put an identity. It's like, isn't it all you're doing is hurting yourself? Meaning, yes, it's accurate that a Don doesn't wear shorts, but if I, or a guy who wasn't, like, it's a real limiting belief or a limiting orthodoxy, because shorts in the summer when it's hot out are a blessing. And it's one of the few joys of being able to enjoy the weather as it gets better, is to have shorts, or you wear shorts in the gym, and at no point, at no point are you supposed to be caught out there. That's a prison, or it's an orthodoxy controlling things that might be enjoyable. And that, I guess that's how I see that identifying identity can also be a way to avoid connecting to positive things. There's a famous video, I don't know how famous it is, but there's a video going around online. It's Carol O'Connor, who played Archie Bunker. And I guess the question was, you know, how is it that, you know, what is the effect? Or, you know, they were calling him a lovable bigot. And the guy who plays him, and plays him so well that they would even call the guy lovable. And even though it's a sitcom, he goes, I don't see it that way. I see it as a guy with these beliefs. He is not a happy man, and he is living such a dark world with that worldview. He's like, he is cut off from so many possibilities. And I think I'm paraphrasing like a mug, and I would encourage you just to, you know, Google Carol O'Connor interview talking about his character, Archie Bunker, a racist. And the fact that he said he just really wasn't that happy of a guy, even though it was funny. And that's what I mean about sort of these limiting beliefs, like shorts. You know, Bill Burr famously talked about it, the way our generation grew up. I hope it's changing. Maybe it's changing too far, but like the vulnerability that you could not share vulnerability with your boys or in the locker room, because you'd be a mark, you know. Seeing a sunset, that's one of the blessings that I have to remember, and why I am still so attached to the theater and storytelling and art, and maybe, you know, I got to find a way to communicate so that I can be my quote unquote authentic self. But I did straddle both worlds, but like if I didn't find a theater, I would have never shown a vulnerability, and that would have been a prison. And you know, and I think that's what extreme belief will do. That's where we're at a lot online, which is why I don't delve into that stuff. And I just don't want to. I mean, there's already enough woe in a daily, you know, a daily existence that you don't have to gin it up. And yet there are transcendent moments. I was at the beach yesterday with my girl on a bench, watching the waves, and I'm grateful for that. And I can do that almost any day of the week, right, if I choose, and I often don't. That's the story of all our lives, right? But people like my friend's sister who's done dream boarding, who's manifested these things, who is an avid film goer, who works a job they wanted, but, still has woes and it's still a drag, and she had a late meeting and that put dinner off. But those people are inspiring, and those people's habits, and there's so much to be learned from, I find other people's sort of habits, and that's part of what the desk session has been about. If this expands to include ever a guest, or to include other people's perspectives, I'm fascinated by that. What is her process? I didn't snoop, but she has this cool workspace, and she went to FIT, and so there's that big, she needs a collage wall. She needs to be able to throw looks up and swatches and all that stuff. And I'm fascinated by other people's workspaces, because I find that if they're in some kind of creative field, that their workspace is telling. And I'd like to know how people motivate, and where did she learn these positive notions, and where did I unlearn them, or where did I let the darkness creep in? And it's a battle. It is a battle. I will tell you that even just yesterday, I had a beautiful day at the beach, and then I also had a meltdown over a technical glitch on the computer vis-a-vis an audition. Trying to get a goddamn audition. Actors Access is the platform, and sometimes your agent gets you an audition, and other times you self-submit. And so when you hit the submit button and you log in, and the whole thing was jacked up, and I could not submit. And I went to 11, man, because I started losing it. It's, and I don't want to take you through it, although, it's the battle. It's the battle. I was like, I was going bananas. Like, it's already a job I'm not going to get. It's already an audition I'm not going to get. And I can't even get the illusion of submitting for it because of their fuck up. And I was going bananas. And if, it's the kind of Christian Bale meltdown. He's got a famous meltdown when he's screaming at someone being in his eye line, and or the Tom Cruise during COVID. It was that, and those were real issues, This really wasn't, but it's the hopelessness and the helplessness and the feeling of like, why, and the indignity of how I feel, and and I guess that's part of the ego, is that I shouldn't have to be groveling like this, and so it's a tough road to walk, and I guess pride is a good thing, but it can also be, part of the prison, to be a prideful person, to not wear shorts, to not wear shorts, to not watch sunsets, to not prioritize your health, to not count your blessings, to not think about things outside of yourself, to not be spiritual, whatever it might be, to not dream board, to not there's so many things that you need to soothe, to fight through, and I guess moving forward, maybe part of either going back to work where I exist with a different attitude would be very helpful, with the gratitude that I was able to come back, and if it doesn't work out, then the idea that you'd interview them as much as they're interviewing you. Now, the power dynamics being what they are, but, I know enough. What's the clientele like? What are the shifts like? I don't like being alone, or was that a neediness that I didn't like that job because I couldn't have friends pop by, or I couldn't make new friends because it was people just sort of, but at that bar, I will tell you, and that's one thing that if I do get an interview in a real estate gig, so many things have happened over the bar. I've met the world, and I met a couple, the Clarks, that was their name. They were visiting from, I think, Ohio or somewhere, and they got to talking to me on one of these slow Sundays, I think it was, and it was real quiet, so it was just us, and very typical. What else do you do besides this? That'll often happen. It happens a lot less the older you get in a restaurant gig. But what do you do outside of here? And I was really trying to say out loud that I'm going to do this play. And I'm looking for places to do it. And I think I was close because I did produce the play while I was at that job. And I think I was only at that job for a couple of years. So it was finally starting to happen. We had rented the space, I think. And during the course of it, they're like, well, what's the next thing you have to do? And I said, I got to do the flyers. And somehow they got my address because they wanted to come see the show. And so would you send us would you let us send us a flyer when it's up and running, And we exchanged addresses, I guess, somehow. But they wound up sending me money. They said, go get your flyers on us. We really want to be helpful. We're really inspired by, you seem like you're really authentically after this. And I don't know if it was $1,000. I think it was some serious money. And they wanted to participate. These little Midwest people, the Clarks. And they sent me money just because they liked who I was when they talked to me at the bar. And that lonely place that my friends couldn't come, that these people appeared. And it makes me emotional just to think of it because it just came up. And I took their money. I went to the printer. I made these dope flyers. The one's up on the board. It's right there above you can't really see it because it's all fuzzy, but those flyers were paid for by them, and the printing. And, back then I had to print them, and that's the way you try to hustle an audience. And I purchased the mailing list from the Manhattan Theater Club, and I had labels, and I had to buy postage. And I remember having to, ask the rest of the cast to help me. Anybody want to help me lick stamps, And I wound up putting a big special thanks to the Clarks in the program, and they came to see it, and I think it was a triumph. And if that's not something, for me, that's a big brag, and not a big brag, but that's what the whole point of it is, I suppose. And so as you revise history and as you change the way you look at it and as you break out of your prison, you have to remember that, yes, it is nostalgic, but it is also a way to have evidence of the contrary if you need it, and evidence of the affirmative if it's a good thing. But I must have been channeling the right energy, spirit, and or I had taken a step forward, and they recognized that and helped me. And so I pray the Clarks are still doing well, and that they ever find out that they got to see the show, and that was that. And I don't know, I didn't do enough yet to make them proud after that show, but I've been trying and endeavoring and still at it. And it's nice to know there anybody out there is rooting for you, and I really appreciate them. And I hope to someday do something, so conspicuous that they they can't miss it, and that will give me more time and more money to kick it with, the people that inspire me. And I guess that's what we're going to leave it with, is just try to stay in that channel and maybe use some nostalgia, but use some looking back as the past path, that maybe you've left some breadcrumbs for yourself, and remember some of the better instincts and try to foster those and to be, I guess, kinder to yourself moving forward. I don't know if I addressed any of the things I usually write down on a Post-it that I keep out of frame, but I can't see it now because I'm not wearing my glasses. So, again, I don't know. I have to scan through this damn thing as long as I've been talking to find 30 seconds that are funny and quippy, and I probably didn't have that. I can already tell. I write and I talk broad arc, in a broad arc, and the thing about that, from what I've gathered, is I'm not a sound bitey thing, and I hope this isn't limiting. What I mean to say is that sometimes the elevator pitch is kind of meh on the things that I work through, and they have to quote unquote be experienced. The one man show it's modular, and the stories within the one man show are, some of them are amusing, and some of them are downright funny, and some of them are downright tragic, but it's the whole that has to be experienced, and that will take a big lift. And I guess that's how life is, right? And so it's a big lift. And anyway, hopefully I can find a little clippy, and hopefully 59 leads to 60 next week. We'll have something for you, and I hope we can stay inspired. So peace. This was Carl D. Death Session 59. Peace.